7 years ago, on a humid Florida evening in 2007, 38-year-old Ashley Reed should have made it home in 10 minutes. The devoted mother and successful real estate agent had just finished a late showing, her silver sedan cutting through the darkening coastal streets. But Ashley's 10-minute drive became an endless nightmare. Her abandoned car, discovered under a lone gas station light with no trace of struggle, launched a community into chaos. Police theories crumbled, leads vanished like morning mist. Yet Ashley's mother refused to surrender hope, lighting a porch light every single night. Then modern DNA technology whispered a name that shattered everything they thought they knew. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from and don't forget to hit subscribe. The sun melted into the Gulf of Mexico on that September evening in 2007, painting Clearwater's sky in brilliant oranges and deep purples. Ashley Reed locked the front door of the colonial-style house she'd just shown to potential buyers, her heels clicking against the brick walkway as cicadas began their nightly symphony. At 38, Ashley had built more than a career in real estate. She'd built trust. Neighbors knew her genuine smile, clients relied on her integrity, and her family counted on her unwavering presence.
"Mom, I'll be home in 10 minutes. Ashley's voice carried warmth through her cell phone as she settled into her silver Honda Accord. "Can't wait to tell you about this deal. The Hendersons are finally ready to make an offer on the waterfront property. Love you."
Those would be the last words Margaret Reed would ever hear from her daughter. Ashley's route home traced familiar streets she'd traveled thousands of times, past the weathered pier where she'd learned to fish as a child, beyond the elementary school where she'd volunteered every Friday, through the intersection where she always waved at Mrs. Patterson tending her garden. The drive from Sunset Ridge subdivision to her mother's house on Maple Street measured exactly 3.2 miles, a journey Ashley could navigate blindfolded. But something went wrong in those 10 minutes. Terribly, irreversibly wrong. At 9:47 p.m., Ashley's Honda appeared on grainy security footage at Murphy's Gas & Go, the last station before her neighborhood. The timestamp showed her car pulling into the well-lit lot, but the angles captured only shadows and shapes. What happened next remained buried in darkness for 7 agonizing years. By 10:30 p.m., Margaret Reed's worry transformed into panic. Ashley never missed their nightly check-in. She never left plans unfinished or promises unspoken. When Margaret's calls went straight to voicemail, she knew her daughter's reliable world had cracked apart. The first patrol car arrived at Murphy's Gas & Go at 11:15 p.m., finding Ashley's sedan positioned perfectly between the painted lines, driver's door unlocked, keys dangling from the ignition. Her purse sat untouched on the passenger seat, credit cards and cash intact. Her real estate files remained neatly stacked in the back seat. Even her favorite coffee mug, still half full, rested in the cup holder, as if she'd simply stepped away for a moment. But Ashley Reed had vanished. Detective Ray Matthews, a 20-year veteran with graying temples and tired eyes, studied the abandoned vehicle under harsh fluorescent lights. No signs of struggle, no broken glass, no blood. The car doors showed no pry marks. The interior held no foreign fingerprints that immediately stood out. It was as if Ashley had simply evaporated into the humid night air. "Ma'am, I need you to think carefully," Detective Matthews asked Margaret Reed as dawn broke over Clearwater. "Did Ashley mention feeling threatened? Any problems with clients? Any personal conflicts?" Margaret's hands trembled as she clutched a photograph of Ashley's radiant smile. "Detective, my daughter was loved by everyone. She helped families find their dreams. She volunteered at the animal shelter. She remembered everyone's birthday. Who would want to hurt someone like that?" The question haunted Clearwater's tight-knit community of 12,000 residents. In a town where people left doors unlocked and children played until streetlights flickered on, Ashley's disappearance shattered their sense of security. Local diners buzzed with theories. Church prayer circles added her name to their lists. The high school where Ashley had graduated valedictorian 20 years earlier held candlelight vigils on their football field. As the first week dissolved into the second, search parties combed through palmettos and pine forests. Volunteer divers explored murky retention ponds, Bloodhounds followed scent trails that led nowhere. The Coast Guard swept coastal waters while helicopters circled overhead, their searchlights cutting through Spanish moss and shadow. Ashley's colleagues at Sunshine Realty couldn't comprehend her absence. She had 3 showings, scheduled for Saturday, whispered her business partner Linda Martinez. Ashley never missed appointments. She'd crawl out of a hospital bed before disappointing a client. Yet the more investigators learned about Ashley's final day, the deeper the mystery became. Security cameras showed her leaving the office at exactly 8:52 p.m., waving goodbye to the night security guard. Her appointment book revealed nothing suspicious, just another successful showing in a career built on helping families find home. As September faded into October, Margaret Reed established a ritual that would define the next 7 years of her life. Every evening at sunset, she climbed the front porch steps of her modest ranch house and switched on the yellow bulb that cast warmth across her garden of roses. Ashley's favorite flowers. The light would burn through the night, a beacon calling her daughter home, a promise that someone still believed in miracles. The case was about to test that faith in ways no mother should ever endure. October's humid embrace wrapped around Clearwater, like a suffocating blanket, as the search for Ashley Reed entered its 4th week. The initial surge of community energy, hundreds of volunteers armed with flashlights and hope, had dwindled to a dedicated core of family members and close friends who refused to accept the growing silence. Detective Matthews stood in the pre-dawn darkness of Brooker Creek Preserve, watching search and rescue teams prepare for another systematic sweep through acres of tangled wilderness. The preserve's ancient cypress trees and murky waterways had swallowed secrets before. Matthews prayed they wouldn't claim Ashley's story too. "We're expanding the grid today," announced Captain Sarah Williams, her voice cutting through the chorus of tree frogs and distant traffic. K-9 units will focus on the eastern quadrants, while dive teams check the deeper channels. Margaret Reed arrived as she had every morning since the search began, carrying thermos after thermos of coffee for the volunteers. Her face, once animated by her daughter's infectious energy, now carried the hollow exhaustion of a mother living in limbo. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands shook slightly as she distributed styrofoam cups to grateful searchers. "Mrs. Reed, you should go home and rest," suggested Officer Michelle Torres, gently touching Margaret's shoulder. "We'll call the moment we find anything." Margaret's laugh held no humor. "Officer, sleep ended the night my daughter disappeared. This is where I belong until she comes home." The methodical search revealed nothing but discarded fishing lures, weathered beer cans, and the occasional alligator sunning itself on fallen logs. Each empty grid square marked on the command post map felt like another door closing on hope. Searchers who'd started the day with determined optimism grew quieter as afternoon shadows lengthened. By 3 p.m. the temperature had climbed to 87 degrees, and humidity made every breath feel like drowning. Volunteers shed jackets and rolled up sleeves, their initial energy sapped by Florida's relentless heat and the weight of futility. Some drifted away, mumbling apologies about work obligations and family responsibilities. "I don't understand it," Margaret confided to Linda Martinez, as they watched divers surface from another fruitless plunge. Ashley's car was right there at the gas station. Someone had to see something. People don't just disappear into thin air. But in Clearwater, Ashley Reed had done exactly that. The most experienced search coordinator, a weathered man named Frank Delacroix, who'd worked missing person cases across 3 decades, pulled Detective Matthews aside as the day's efforts wound down. "Ray, I've never seen anything like this. Usually we find clothing, personal items, some kind of trail. It's like she was never here at all." The absence of evidence became evidence itself, pointing towards something far more sinister than a random crime of opportunity. Whoever had taken Ashley possessed enough knowledge and planning to leave virtually no trace. The realization sent ice through Matthew's veins, despite the sweltering afternoon heat. As sunset approached, Margaret Reed performed her nightly ritual with mechanical precision. The porch light clicked on, casting its warm glow across empty streets, where children once played and neighbors once chatted over fence lines. Now curtains stayed drawn and conversations happened in hushed whispers behind locked doors. "Mom, you need to eat something," urged Ashley's younger sister, Jessica. Arriving with containers of leftover casseroles from well-meaning church members, the Reed family refrigerator overflowed with sympathy meals, tuna noodle casseroles, baked chicken, chocolate chip cookies. But grief had stolen everyone's appetite. Margaret stared at the glowing porch light, its steady radiance cutting through gathering darkness. "She's out there somewhere, Jess. I can feel it. A mother knows these things." Jessica wrapped her arms around her mother's trembling shoulders, both women united in desperate hope and growing despair. The evening news would run Ashley's story for another few days, but they both understood how quickly missing persons cases faded from public consciousness. Today's tragedy became tomorrow's forgotten headline. At the police station, Detective Matthews spread crime scene photographs across his desk like pieces of an impossible puzzle. Ashley's abandoned car, the empty gas station lot, her purse with everything intact, her cell phone showing no unusual calls or messages. Each image told the same story. Ashley Reed had simply vanished. The forensics report offered no new insights. No foreign DNA in the vehicle. No fingerprints that didn't belong to Ashley or her family. Even the security footage from Murphy's Gas and Go proved maddeningly inconclusive. Grainy images that showed movement but revealed no details. Shadows that could belong to anyone or no one. As October's first week died, Detective Matthews faced the reality he'd been avoiding. Without new evidence, without witnesses, without even a credible theory about what had happened, Ashley Reed's case was sliding toward the dreaded designation that haunted every investigator's nightmares. The case was going cold, and with it a family's hope was slowly freezing to death. The Clearwater Police Department's conference room buzzed with caffeine-fueled urgency as Detective Matthews assembled his investigation team on Ashley Reed's fifth day missing. Whiteboards covered 3 walls, filled with timeline markers, suspect profiles, and evidence photographs that told an increasingly frustrating story of dead ends and false leads. "Let's start from the beginning," Matthews announced, his tie loosened after another sleepless night. Ashley leaves Sunshine Realty at 8:52 p.m. Security guard Jimmy Kowalski confirms she seemed normal, maybe excited about a potential sale. What happens between then and 9:47 p.m., when her car appears at Murphy's Gas and Go? Detective Lisa Chang consulted her notebook, pages filled with meticulous handwriting. "I've interviewed everyone who worked that night along Ashley's route. The 7-Eleven clerk remembers selling cigarettes to a teenage couple around 9:30, but saw no silver Honda. The Subway sandwich artist was closing up and noticed nothing unusual, same with the staff at Mel's Diner." The investigation had consumed dozens of personnel hours, following every thread that might connect to Ashley's disappearance. Her client list revealed satisfied customers and grateful families, but no obvious conflicts or threats. Her personal relationships painted a picture of someone genuinely loved by friends, family, and colleagues. "What about the ex-boyfriend situation?" asked Officer Torrens, referring to Ashley's relationship with Michael Brennan, which had ended amicably 6 months earlier.
"Solid alibi,"
Chang replied. Michael was at his nephew's birthday party in Tampa from 7 p.m. until after midnight. 37 witnesses, including a restaurant receipt timestamped at 9:15 p.m., plus, they remained friends. He's been helping coordinate search efforts. Detective Matthews studied the timeline board, searching for gaps that might hide crucial information. Ashley's cell phone records showed normal activity, texts with her mother about dinner plans, a brief call to a client confirming Saturday's appointment, a quick conversation with her sister about their father's upcoming birthday. Nothing suggested distress or danger. The forensic examination of Ashley's Honda Accord had been equally disappointing. Crime scene technicians processed every surface, collecting fingerprints that belonged to Ashley, her family members, and her mechanic from a recent oil change. Fiber analysis revealed nothing unusual. Even the car's GPS system offered no help. Ashley rarely used it for local trips, relying instead on her intimate knowledge of Clearwater's streets. "We're missing something," Matthews muttered, rubbing his temples where a persistent headache had taken residence. "People don't just evaporate. There's always evidence, always a trail." The gas station's security system provided the investigation's most promising lead, and its most bitter disappointment. Murphy's Gas and Go had installed cameras 6 months earlier, but the positioning covered only the interior store and the immediate pump area. The parking spaces where Ashley's car was found fell into a blind spot between camera angles. Store owner Raj Patel had reviewed the footage countless times with investigators. "I see her car pull in, but the angle is wrong. Just shadows and shapes. My insurance company said the cameras were adequate coverage, but now..." His voice trailed off, weighted with guilt over a decision that might have changed everything. The canvassing of nearby businesses and residences had yielded fragments of information that refused to coalesce into meaningful clues. Mrs. Eleanor Simpson, who lived in the trailer park behind Murphy's, thought she'd heard voices around 10 p.m., but couldn't identify words or speakers. A teenage boy claimed to have seen 2 people near a silver car, but admitted he'd been drinking and couldn't provide reliable details. "What about the anonymous tip line?" Matthews asked, though he already knew the answer would disappoint him. Officer Jenkins consulted his call log. 47 calls so far. 32 were well-meaning but useless. People reporting silver cars in other states, psychics offering visions, conspiracy theories about alien abduction. 15 showed genuine concern but no actionable information. Nobody saw anything concrete. The investigation's scope expanded beyond Clearwater as detectives considered the possibility that Ashley's disappearance connected to a broader pattern. Matthews contacted agencies throughout Florida, searching for similar cases: women vanishing from gas stations, real estate agents targeted by predators, any crime that might share characteristics with Ashley's situation. "There's been a case in Jacksonville from 2003, reported Detective Chang, after hours of database searches. A female real estate agent disappeared after showing a property, but she was found 3 days later, car accident, lost consciousness, wandered into the woods. Different circumstances entirely." As the first week concluded, the investigation team faced a sobering reality. Despite hundreds of interviews, exhaustive forensic examination, and community-wide searches, Ashley Reed's disappearance remained as mysterious as the moment her empty car was discovered. The absence of evidence suggested either remarkable luck on a perpetrator's part or careful planning that spoke to someone with intimate knowledge of police procedures. Margaret Reed continued her vigil, the porch light burning through another night as investigators worked by desk lamps and determination. Somewhere in Clearwater's maze of suburban streets and hidden waterways lay answers to her daughter's fate. Finding them would require more than conventional police work. It would demand the kind of breakthrough that comes from unexpected directions, the kind that changes everything when hope has nearly died. Clearwater's usually tranquil neighborhoods transformed into a landscape of whispered conversations and worried glances as Ashley Reed's disappearance entered its second week. The community that once embodied small-town trust now found itself questioning every shadow, every stranger, every unexplained sound in the night. St. Matthew's Catholic Church, where Ashley had volunteered for their annual charity drive, became the unofficial headquarters for civilian search efforts. Father O'Brien opened the parish hall every morning at dawn, serving coffee and coordination to volunteers who refused to let Ashley's case fade into statistical obscurity. "We're going to find her," declared Tom Hendricks, a retired Marine whose weathered hands traced search grids on laminated maps. "This community doesn't abandon its own." His certainty carried the weight of military discipline, but his eyes betrayed the same fear that haunted every Clearwater resident. If Ashley Reed could vanish without trace, anyone could. The investigation's focus gradually shifted toward Ashley's final client meeting, the house showing that preceded her disappearance. Detective Matthews drove to Sunset Ridge subdivision repeatedly, studying the colonial-style home where Ashley had spent her last documented hour. The property sat empty, its for-sale sign creaking in gulf breezes that carried the scent of approaching autumn. She was excited about this showing, remembered Linda Martinez, Ashley's business partner, as they walked through rooms where Ashley had pointed out crown molding and original hardwood floors. The buyers had been looking for 8 months. Ashley thought this might be the one, but the Hendersons, Potential buyers who'd accompanied Ashley that evening provided investigators with more questions than answers. Harold and Betty Henderson, a retired couple relocating from Minnesota, described Ashley as professional and enthusiastic during their hour-long tour. "She showed us every room twice," Betty Henderson recalled, her Midwestern accent thickening with emotion. "We talked about grandchildren visiting, about the master bedroom's view of the canal. She was making plans. Detective, people making plans don't just disappear." The Hendersons' timeline created the investigation's most concrete lead. They'd followed Ashley to the property at 8:00 p.m., toured until approximately 9:00 p.m., then watched her lock up and walk to her car. Their description of Ashley's demeanor, excited, optimistic, eager to call her mother with good news, matched everything investigators knew about her personality. "Did you notice anyone else in the neighborhood?" Detective Matthews asked during their third interview. "Any vehicles that seemed out of place? Anyone watching the property?" Harold Henderson's memory proved frustratingly vague. "There was a pickup truck parked down the street when we arrived. White or light blue, maybe. But it was gone when we left. Could have been a neighbor, could have been anyone." The pickup truck became the investigation's newest focus, though tracking an unidentified vehicle with minimal description proved nearly impossible. Clearwater's residents owned hundreds of light-colored pickup trucks, and without license plate information or distinctive features, the lead offered more frustration than progress. Community volunteers organized their own investigation efforts, posting Ashley's photograph in businesses throughout Pinellas County. Her smiling face appeared on grocery store bulletin boards, gas station windows, and restaurant entrance doors. Local television stations ran her story during evening news broadcasts, generating dozens of tips that investigators dutifully pursued despite diminishing hope for breakthrough information. The most promising lead emerged from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, who cleaned offices in the medical complex adjacent to Sunset Ridge subdivision, contacted police after seeing Ashley's photograph on the morning news. Maria's broken English and nervous demeanor initially frustrated Detective Chang, but her story gradually revealed potentially crucial information. "I see the lady," Maria insisted, pointing at Ashley's photograph with a trembling finger. "Tuesday night, maybe 9 or 9:30. She talks to someone in her car, a man. They look not happy." Maria's account placed Ashley at Murphy's Gas and Go during the time frame when she disappeared, but her description of the mysterious man remained frustratingly vague. "Not tall, not short. Dark hair, maybe. I only see from far away, through my car window." Despite multiple interviews and attempts at composite sketching, Maria couldn't provide enough detail to generate a useful suspect description. Her certainty about witnessing an argument, however, gave investigators their first concrete evidence that Ashley hadn't simply vanished. She'd encountered someone at the gas station. The revelation energized both the investigation team and community volunteers. If Ashley had argued with someone at Murphy's, that someone might hold the key to her disappearance. Detective Matthews organized additional canvass efforts, focusing on residents and businesses near the gas station who might have witnessed the encounter Maria described. As October's second week faded, Margaret Reed's porch light continued its faithful vigil. The yellow glow had become Clearwater's unofficial symbol of hope, inspiring other families to illuminate their own porches in solidarity. Maple Street sparkled with sympathetic lights, creating a constellation of community support that stretched through neighborhoods where children once played freely and doors once remained unlocked. But light couldn't penetrate the darkness surrounding Ashley's fate, and with each passing day, the investigation's momentum slowed like a car running out of gas on an endless highway. November's chill descended on Clearwater like an unwelcome verdict, matching the growing coldness Detective Matthews felt in his bones as Ashley Reed's case entered its 8th week without resolution. The conference room that once buzzed with investigative energy now felt like a mausoleum of false leads and exhausted possibilities. "We've interviewed over 200 people," Matthews announced to his increasingly demoralized team, his voice hoarse from weeks of intensive questioning. "We've processed 47 potential pieces of evidence. We've followed up on 63 tips from the public, and we're no closer to finding Ashley than we were the night she disappeared." The investigation had consumed unprecedented resources for a department accustomed to solving cases within days or weeks. Every available detective had worked overtime, sacrificing family dinners and weekend rest to pursue leads that inevitably led nowhere. The department's budget strained under costs for overtime pay, forensic testing, and specialized equipment rental. Detective Chang spread crime scene photographs across the table like tarot cards that refused to reveal their secrets. "I keep staring at these images, hoping I'll spot something we missed, but there's nothing there. No evidence, no witnesses, no digital trail. It's like she was taken by a ghost." The most frustrating aspect of the investigation wasn't the absence of leads, it was the abundance of leads that crumbled under scrutiny. Maria Santos's account of an argument at Murphy's Gas and Go had generated dozens of follow-up interviews with nearby residents, but nobody else reported seeing Ashley with an unknown man. Security footage from surrounding businesses showed normal traffic patterns, with no suspicious activity. "What about the pickup truck the Hendersons mentioned?" asked Officer Torres, grasping for any thread that might unravel the mystery. "Dead end," Matthews replied wearily. "We identified 12 white or light blue pickup trucks in that neighborhood. Interviewed every owner. 3 were at work during the time frame. 2 were at family dinners with multiple witnesses. 4 were home with verifiable alibis, and 3 hadn't been driven that day. Plus, the Hendersons aren't even certain they saw it that night versus some other evening." The forensic evidence proved equally disappointing. Ashley's Honda Accord had been processed multiple times by different technicians, each hoping fresh eyes might reveal overlooked clues. But the car stubbornly refused to yield its secrets. Even the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, consulted as a last resort, could offer only generalities about stranger abduction patterns that might or might not apply to Ashley's case. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the FBI's consulting criminal psychologist, delivered her assessment with clinical detachment that masked obvious sympathy for the investigation team's frustration. "Without a crime scene, without evidence of the actual abduction, we can only speculate about motive and methodology. The complete absence of physical evidence suggests either extreme luck or sophisticated planning." The psychological profile offered little comfort. Ashley's abductor was likely someone familiar with police procedures, possibly someone who'd studied similar cases or possessed law enforcement training. The clean crime scene suggested advanced planning rather than opportunistic violence. Most disturbingly, the total absence of evidence might indicate the perpetrator had successfully committed similar crimes before. Margaret Reed's daily visits to the police station became increasingly painful for everyone involved. Her initial composure had gradually eroded into a brittle facade that threatened to shatter with each disappointing update. Her questions grew more specific and desperate. Had they checked every surveillance camera within 5 miles? Had they re-interviewed Ashley's clients from the previous month? Had they considered the possibility of human trafficking? "Mrs. Reed, I promise we're doing everything humanly possible," Detective Matthews assured her during one particularly difficult meeting. "We're not giving up. We need more to work with." Margaret's laugh carried no humor. "Detective, I understand you're frustrated, but my daughter is out there somewhere, and I can't accept that we've exhausted every possibility. There has to be something we're missing." Her faith in ultimate resolution remained unshakable, but it couldn't mask the toll Ashley's disappearance had taken on her family. Jessica Reed had taken leave from her teaching job to help coordinate search efforts and support her mother. Ashley's father, normally a pillar of quiet strength, now spent hours staring at his daughter's photograph with eyes that held too much pain for words. The community's initial surge of support had inevitably waned as weeks passed without progress. Volunteer search parties dwindled to a dedicated core of family friends and church members. Local media coverage shifted from front-page headlines to brief updates buried in interior sections. New tragedies and crises competed for public attention, pushing Ashley's story toward the margins of collective memory. As November surrendered to December, Detective Matthews faced the reality he'd been avoiding. Without new evidence, without fresh leads, without some unexpected breakthrough, Ashley Reed's case would join the ranks of unsolved disappearances that haunted law enforcement careers and destroyed families' faith in justice. The investigation wasn't officially closed, but it was effectively frozen, waiting for a miracle that might never come. Winter settled over Clearwater with unusual severity, bringing temperatures that forced residents to retrieve forgotten jackets and close windows that had remained open through autumn's warmth. But no chill could match the cold that had entered the Reed family's lives as Ashley's case officially transitioned from active investigation to cold case status. Detective Matthews delivered the news on a gray December morning that seemed to leach color from everything it touched. He sat in Margaret Reed's living room, the same room where Ashley had opened Christmas presents for 38 years, and struggled to find words that might soften an unbearable reality. "We're not giving up," he emphasized, his hands clasped tightly to prevent them from trembling. "Cold case doesn't mean closed case. It means we're preserving all evidence and waiting for new developments. Sometimes cases solve themselves years later, when technology improves or when someone comes forward with information." Margaret stared at the mantelpiece where Ashley's high school graduation photograph smiled forever, at age 18, frozen in a moment when the future held infinite possibilities. "You're telling me to stop hoping?" "No, ma'am. I'm telling you, we've exhausted current investigative options. But hope is what keeps cases alive." The official designation changed nothing about the investigation's daily reality. Leads had already dried up, evidence had already been processed, witnesses had already been interviewed, but the psychological impact on Ashley's family proved devastating. The transition from active to cold felt like watching her die a second time. Jessica Reed found her mother in Ashley's bedroom 3 days before Christmas, sitting on the carefully made bed and holding one of her sister's favorite sweaters. The room remained exactly as Ashley had left it. Makeup arranged on the dresser, books stacked on the nightstand, clothes hanging in the closet as if she might return any moment to get dressed for work. "Mom, you can't keep torturing yourself like this," Jessica whispered, settling beside her mother on the floral comforter Ashley had chosen during college. "I smell her perfume sometimes," Margaret replied, her voice barely audible. "Just for a second I think she's home. Then I remember, and it's like losing her all over again." The holidays arrived with cruel indifference to the Reed family's grief. Neighbors decorated houses with twinkling lights and inflatable snowmen, while Ashley's childhood home remained dark except for the faithful porch light that burned through each night. Well-meaning friends issued invitations to Christmas dinners and New Year's parties, but the family couldn't imagine celebrating anything while Ashley's fate remained unknown. Margaret's ritual of lighting the porch light had evolved into something more complex and desperate. She now left Ashley's bedroom light on during the day, her car radio tuned to Ashley's favorite station, and her cell phone charged and ready in case her daughter somehow found a way to call. The electric bills doubled, but Margaret couldn't bear the thought that Ashley might return to a dark, silent house. "The not knowing is killing her," Jessica confided to Detective Matthews during one of their periodic check-ins. "At least if we knew what happened, we could grieve properly. This limbo is destroying what's left of our family." The community's response reflected the painful reality of how quickly tragedy fades from public consciousness. Ashley's missing person posters, once prominently displayed in every business window, had been gradually replaced by advertisements for holiday sales and New Year's gym memberships. People still remembered her disappearance when directly asked, but it no longer dominated daily conversations or evening news broadcasts. Father O'Brien, at St. Matthew's Catholic Church, watched Margaret Reed's faith undergo a transformation that worried him deeply. Her prayers had shifted from requests for Ashley's safe return to desperate negotiations with a God who seemed to have abandoned her family. She attended daily mass with mechanical precision, but her eyes held the hollow quality of someone whose hope had curdled into something harder and more bitter. "I keep thinking about all the things I should have done differently," Margaret told him after one particularly difficult service. "Maybe I should have insisted Ashley live at home instead of getting her own apartment. Maybe I should have worried more when she worked late. Maybe I failed as a mother, and this is my punishment." The guilt consumed her like acid, eating away at decades of memories that had once brought joy. Family photographs became sources of pain rather than comfort. Ashley's accomplishments, her college degree, her successful career, her volunteer work, now felt like evidence of a life cut tragically short, rather than achievements worth celebrating. As 2008 dawned, with reluctant optimism for most Clearwater residents, the Reed family faced their first New Year without Ashley. The porch light continued its faithful vigil, a yellow beacon cutting through winter darkness and casting long shadows across a garden where Ashley's favorite roses lay dormant, beneath protective mulch. Margaret made one resolution for the coming year. She would never stop believing that someone somewhere held the key to bringing her daughter home. Even if that belief eventually destroyed her, it was all she had left. 5 years had passed since Ashley Reed's disappearance. 5 cycles of seasons that brought no resolution, no closure, no peace to a family suspended in eternal limbo. Clearwater had gradually returned to its rhythm of daily life. Children grew older, businesses changed ownership, new families moved into neighborhoods where Ashley once sold houses with infectious enthusiasm, but her absence remained like a scar across the community's collective memory. Margaret Reed's porch light had become a local landmark, mentioned in newspaper articles about the case's anniversary and pointed out to newcomers by longtime residents who still remembered the hopeful young real estate agent who'd helped them find their dreams. The yellow bulb had been replaced dozens of times, but its glow never wavered, a testament to a mother's refusal to surrender hope even when hope felt like another form of torture. "Some people think I'm crazy," Margaret admitted to Detective Matthews during one of his periodic check-ins, her voice carrying the weight of years spent waiting for phone calls that never came. "They think I should accept reality and move on. But how do you move on from your child? How do you just forget someone you love more than your own life?" Detective Matthews, now grayer and bearing the accumulated exhaustion of dozens of unsolved cases, had never developed a satisfactory answer to that question. Ashley's file remained on his desk, thicker now with follow-up reports and periodic reviews, but no closer to resolution than the night she'd vanished. The case haunted him in ways that colleagues noticed. He'd grown quieter, more introspective, occasionally staring at evidence photographs, as if willing them to reveal secrets they'd refused to share for half a decade. The police department had undergone significant changes during Ashley's 5 years in limbo. New officers joined the force without knowing her personally, relying on case files and briefings to understand why this particular disappearance remained so significant to their veteran colleagues. Technology had advanced dramatically. DNA testing had become more sophisticated, surveillance systems had improved, and digital forensics had evolved beyond recognition. But none of these improvements could retroactively solve a case that had yielded virtually no evidence to analyze. Detective Sarah Chen, recently assigned to the cold case unit, brought fresh eyes to Ashley's file with the enthusiasm of someone who hadn't yet learned that some mysteries resist solution despite years of dedicated effort. She spent weeks reviewing every interview transcript, every piece of evidence, every lead that had been pursued and abandoned. "I don't understand how someone just disappears," Chen confided to Matthews, as they spread Ashley's case materials across a conference table that had hosted dozens of similar discussions over the years. "There's always something. Always a witness. Always evidence. Always some thread we can follow." "That's what I thought 5 years ago," Matthews replied, his tone carrying hard-earned wisdom about the limits of investigative persistence. "Sometimes there really is nothing to find. Sometimes the bad guys get lucky. Or they're smarter than we give them credit for. Or they've done this before and learned from their mistakes." The community's relationship with Ashley's case had evolved in complicated ways. Local businesses still displayed her photograph in their windows, but the images had faded with age and repeated exposure to Florida's harsh sun. Her missing person flyers, once crisp and urgent, now carried the yellowed patina of time past and opportunities missed. Clearwater had experienced other tragedies in the intervening years. A fatal car accident involving 3 teenagers, a house fire that claimed an elderly couple, a boating accident that shocked the close-knit fishing community, but none had generated the lingering mystery that surrounded Ashley's fate. People could grieve properly for victims whose stories had conclusions, whose families could hold funerals, and find some measure of peace in knowing what had happened to their loved ones. The Reed family had fractured under the pressure of unresolved loss. Jessica had moved to Orlando, ostensibly for work opportunities, but really to escape the suffocating weight of her sister's absence. Ashley's father had retreated into silence, spending increasingly long hours in his workshop building furniture that would never be used, because completing projects felt like accepting that normal life could continue without his daughter. Margaret remained the family's emotional anchor, maintaining Ashley's bedroom exactly as she'd left it, continuing to pay her cell phone bill in case she somehow found a way to call, and organizing annual memorial walks that drew smaller crowds each year. Her grief had calcified into something harder and more determined, a refusal to let Ashley become just another statistic in law enforcement's growing files of unsolved cases. "People forget," she told a local reporter during the 5th anniversary of Ashley's disappearance. "They move on with their lives because they have to, because they have their own families to worry about. But I can't move on. I won't move on. Someone out there knows what happened to my daughter, and I'm going to keep that porch light burning until they find the courage to tell the truth." As 2012 dawned with its promise of technological advancement and social progress, Ashley Reed remained frozen in 2007, forever 38, forever missing, forever breaking her mother's heart with each sunrise that failed to bring her home. Detective Sarah Chen stared at the computer screen in disbelief, her coffee growing cold as she processed information that could change everything about Ashley Reed's case. 7 years had passed since that humid September night in 2007, and technology had finally caught up with a mystery that had refused to yield its secrets to conventional investigation. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: the Florida Department of Law Enforcement's newly implemented CODIS database expansion, which had dramatically increased the state's capacity to process and cross-reference DNA evidence from cold cases. What had once taken months of laboratory work could now be accomplished in days, and Chen had submitted Ashley's case evidence for routine reanalysis as part of her systematic review of unsolved disappearances. "Ray, you need to see this," Chen called across the detective bureau, her voice carrying an urgency that made Matthews look up from his morning reports with immediate attention. The DNA profile that appeared on Chen's monitor had been extracted from a single hair follicle, found wedged beneath the driver's seat of Ashley's Honda Accord, a microscopic piece of evidence that had been collected during the original investigation but lacked the technological capability for meaningful analysis. In 2007, the hair had been cataloged and stored with dozens of other potential clues that might someday prove significant. "The lab found a match in the system," Chen explained, her excitement barely contained as Matthews studied the screen over her shoulder. "The DNA belongs to someone with a criminal record. Someone who was in Ashley's car." The name that appeared beside the genetic profile sent shockwaves through the investigation: David Michael Thornton, age 42. A registered sex offender who had been arrested multiple times for assault, burglary, and attempted kidnapping. More significantly, Thornton had lived in Clearwater during 2007, working as a handyman and occasional contractor for local businesses. "Jesus," Matthews whispered, his hands trembling slightly as the implications sank in. "We interviewed this guy. He was on our list of persons of interest because of his record. But he had an alibi. Said he was working a construction job in Tampa the night Ashley disappeared." Chen pulled up Thornton's file from the original investigation, scanning through interview transcripts and background information that had seemed routine 7 years earlier. His supervisor confirmed he was scheduled to work late that night. Nobody thought to verify whether he actually showed up. The alibi that had eliminated Thornton as a suspect in 2007 crumbled under modern scrutiny. Phone records, now digitally archived and searchable, showed no calls from Thornton's cell phone in the Tampa area during the critical time frame. Credit card records, easily accessible through updated databases, showed no purchases that would place him at the construction site. Most damning, payroll records indicated that Thornton had actually called in sick that evening, information that had been overlooked during the original investigation's chaotic early days. "How did we miss this?" Matthews asked, though he already knew the answer. In 2007, cross-referencing multiple databases required weeks of paperwork and interagency cooperation. Phone records took court orders, and lengthy processing time. Employment verification relied on verbal confirmation from supervisors who might not remember specific dates. The technology that made Thornton's deception obvious in 2014 simply hadn't existed when Ashley first disappeared. Chen continued scrolling through Thornton's updated criminal history, revealing a pattern that sent chills through both detectives. Since 2007, he had been arrested twice for stalking women, once for breaking into a female neighbor's apartment, and had violated his sex offender registration requirements multiple times. The man who had fooled investigators 7 years earlier with a simple lie had continued targeting women throughout Clearwater and surrounding counties. "We need to find him," Matthews declared, reaching for his phone to coordinate with patrol units. "Now, before he realizes we're onto him." But David Michael Thornton had vanished as completely as Ashley Reed herself. His last known address, a rundown trailer in a park north of town, had been abandoned 3 months earlier. His sex offender registration had lapsed, making him a fugitive from justice even before the DNA revelation linked him to Ashley's case. Neighbors described a quiet, unremarkable man who kept irregular hours and seemed to disappear for days at a time without explanation. The investigation that had been frozen in futility for 7 years suddenly exploded with renewed energy. Every detective in the department received copies of Thornton's photograph and description. Regional law enforcement agencies were notified to watch for his distinctive vehicle, a faded blue pickup truck that matched the Hendersons' vague recollection from Ashley's final night. The FBI's fugitive task force was contacted to coordinate a multi-state manhunt. Margaret Reed received the call she had dreamed about for 7 years while tending the rose garden where Ashley had once helped plant bulbs as a child. Detective Matthews' voice carried excitement and caution as he delivered news that seemed too miraculous to believe. They had identified Ashley's abductor, and they were closing in on bringing him to justice. "Mrs. Reed, I need you to understand this is just the beginning. Finding Ashley, that's still our priority, but we finally know who took her." For the first time in 7 years, Margaret Reed allowed herself to imagine that the porch light might soon be turned off forever. The manhunt for David Michael Thornton consumed every available resource as Clearwater police coordinated with agencies across 3 states to locate a predator who had hidden in plain sight for 7 years. His photograph appeared on television screens throughout Florida, accompanied by urgent warnings that he should be considered extremely dangerous and not approached by civilians. Detective Chen worked around the clock, piecing together Thornton's movements and associations that might reveal where he'd gone after abandoning his trailer. The portrait that emerged painted a disturbing picture of a man who had perfected the art of deception, charming employers and neighbors while harboring violent fantasies about the women around him. He worked for at least 6 different contractors between 2005 and 2014, Chen reported during the task force's daily briefing. Always cash jobs, always temporary work. He specialized in home repairs and maintenance, exactly the kind of work that would give him access to houses, to women's daily routines, to information about when they'd be alone. The revelation about Thornton's profession sent investigators scrambling to cross-reference his employment history with Ashley's real estate listings. The connection they discovered made everyone's blood run cold. Thornton had performed minor electrical work at the Sunset Ridge property just 2 weeks before Ashley's final showing. He would have known the house's layout, its isolated location, its value as a potential crime scene. Ashley wasn't randomly selected, Matthews realized, the pieces finally falling into a pattern that made terrible sense. Thornton knew she'd be there that night. He knew she'd be alone. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was planned, calculated, deliberate. The electrical work had been arranged through the property's owner, an elderly woman named Dorothy Mills, who had hired Thornton based on a recommendation from her neighbor. Mrs. Mills remembered him as polite, professional, and knowledgeable about older homes' wiring systems. She had paid him in cash and hadn't thought to request references or verify his contractor's license. "He seemed so nice," Mrs. Mills told investigators, her voice shaking as she realized how close she might have come to becoming a victim herself. "He complimented my garden, asked about my family. I even offered to come back and fix my porch light for free." "Oh God, that poor girl," Thornton's pattern became clearer as investigators dug deeper into his background. He targeted women through his work, learning their schedules and vulnerabilities, while appearing to be nothing more than a helpful handyman. His criminal psychology profile, hastily assembled by FBI behavioral analyst, described a methodical predator who used legitimate employment as cover for stalking and assault. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Thornton's ex-girlfriend, Maria Santos, the same cleaning woman who had reported seeing Ashley argue with a man at Murphy's Gas and Go 7 years earlier. Maria had lived with Thornton briefly in 2007, but had been too frightened of his violent temper to come forward when police first investigated Ashley's disappearance.
I know it was him.
Maria told Detective Chen through tears and broken English, her hands shaking as she identified Thornton's photograph. He came home that night, very late, very angry. His clothes were dirty, and he washed them right away in the sink. I ask what happened, and he grabs my arm so hard it leaves marks. He says if I tell anyone anything, he will kill me too. Maria's testimony provided the crucial link between Thornton and Ashley's abduction. She remembered the date clearly because it was the same night her nephew had been born, and she'd been trying to call her sister at the hospital when Thornton returned home in his agitated state. Her fear had kept her silent for 15 years, but seeing Ashley's mother on television pleading for information had finally convinced her to risk Thornton's threats. He always watches the news after that, Maria continued, her voice barely audible. Every story about the missing lady, he watches and he smiles, like he was proud, like it makes him happy to see people sad. The psychological profile painted Thornton as a narcissistic sociopath who derived pleasure from others' pain. His careful selection of Ashley, his meticulous planning of her abduction, and his apparent enjoyment of her family's suffering suggested a level of premeditation that made the crime even more horrifying. Armed with Maria's testimony and the DNA evidence, prosecutors felt confident they could secure a conviction if Thornton could be found and arrested. The manhunt intensified as investigators realized they were pursuing someone who had likely committed similar crimes in other jurisdictions, possibly for decades. This isn't his first time, warned Dr. Lisa Reynolds, the FBI's consulting criminal psychologist. Men like Thornton don't start with perfect crimes. There are probably other victims, other families, who never got answers. Finding him isn't just about justice for Ashley. It's about preventing future tragedies. As the investigation entered its second week since the DNA breakthrough, Margaret Reed maintained her vigil with renewed purpose. The porch light that had burned for 7 years as a beacon of hope now served a different function, a promise that her daughter's killer would face justice, no matter how long it took to drag him out of whatever hole he'd crawled into. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a humid Thursday morning that would forever divide Clearwater's history into before and after. Detective Matthews jolted awake to the sound of his phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand, 7 years of disappointment having conditioned him to expect nothing but frustration from late-night case developments. "We got him." Detective Chen's voice crackled through the phone, her excitement barely contained despite the early hour. Alabama State Police found Thornton at a truck stop outside Mobile. "He's in custody, and they're holding him for us." The arrest had unfolded with anticlimactic efficiency after years of painstaking investigation. Thornton had been spotted by an alert highway patrol officer who recognized his distinctive pickup truck from the nationwide Bolo alert. When approached for a routine license check, Thornton had panicked and attempted to flee, but his vehicle broke down less than 2 miles from the truck stop where he'd been living out of his cab for weeks. By sunrise, a convoy of Clearwater police vehicles was speeding north on Interstate 75 toward Alabama, carrying investigators who had waited 7 years for this moment. Detective Matthews stared at the passing landscape of pine forests and small towns, each mile bringing them closer to answers that might finally allow Ashley Reed's family to find peace. Thornton's appearance shocked the officers who had studied his photograph for years. The man who sat shackled in the Mobile County Jail bore little resemblance to the clean-cut handyman who had charmed his way into Clearwater homes. 7 years of running had transformed him into a gaunt, bearded figure with hollow eyes and the desperate look of someone who knew his time was up. I don't know what you're talking about, Thornton insisted during his first interrogation, his voice carrying the practiced innocence of someone who had lied his way out of trouble for decades. I never hurt anybody. You got the wrong guy. But the evidence spoke louder than his denials. The DNA from Ashley's car provided irrefutable proof of his presence at the crime scene. Maria Santos's testimony established his behavior immediately after Ashley's disappearance. His false alibi and subsequent flight from justice painted a clear picture of guilt that no amount of protestation could erase. The interrogation stretched through 2 days as Thornton's lies gradually collapsed under the weight of accumulated evidence. His story changed repeatedly, first claiming he'd never met Ashley, then admitting he might have seen her car at the gas station, finally acknowledging that he'd approached her but insisting their interaction had been harmless. She was having car trouble, Thornton eventually admitted, his voice barely audible as Detective Chen pressed him for details. I was just trying to help. Things got complicated. The euphemism made Chen's stomach turn, but she maintained professional composure as Thornton slowly revealed fragments of what had happened that September night. His version of events painted Ashley's murder as an accident, a tragic misunderstanding that had spiraled out of control when she'd resisted his advances. I never meant for it to happen, Thornton claimed, tears streaming down his face in what investigators recognized as self-pity rather than genuine remorse. She started screaming, and I panicked. I couldn't let her identify me. The confession, when it finally came, provided answers that brought no comfort to Ashley's family. Thornton described following Ashley to Murphy's Gas and Go, approaching her under the pretense of offering help with what he falsely claimed was a flat tire. When Ashley had realized his deception and attempted to flee, Thornton had forced her into his pickup truck and driven to a remote location where he'd sexually assaulted and murdered her. Ashley's body, Thornton revealed with clinical detachment, had been disposed of in a sinkhole deep in the Withlacoochee State Forest, weighted down with concrete blocks, and lost forever in the limestone caves that honeycombed Central Florida's underground. The location was so remote and well hidden that recovery would be virtually impossible, denying her family even the consolation of a proper burial. News of Thornton's arrest and confession spread through Clearwater like wildfire, generating reactions that ranged from relief to rage to profound sadness. The community that had supported the Reed family for 7 years now struggled to process the reality that Ashley's killer had lived among them, had been someone they might have hired for odd jobs or encountered at local businesses. Margaret Reed's reaction surprised even the investigators, who thought they understood the depths of her grief. Rather than celebration or vengeance, she felt only numbness as Detective Matthews delivered the news she had dreamed of hearing for 7 years. The porch light that had burned faithfully through seasons of hope and despair would finally be turned off, but the victory felt hollow without Ashley there to share it. I always thought I'd feel different when this day came, Margaret told Jessica as they sat in the living room where Ashley's photograph still smiled from every surface. I thought I'd feel justice or peace or closure, but I just feel empty. She's still gone, and knowing who took her doesn't bring her back. As Clearwater prepared for the trial that would finally deliver justice for Ashley Reed, the community began the long process of healing from betrayal, loss, and the terrible knowledge that evil sometimes wore familiar faces. The Pinellas County Courthouse had never seen media attention like the coverage that descended upon Clearwater as David Michael Thornton's trial began on a sweltering July morning, and television trucks lined the streets around the imposing limestone building, while reporters from across the Southeast positioned themselves for updates on a case that had captivated the region for 8 years. Margaret Reed entered the courthouse wearing Ashley's favorite necklace, a simple silver chain with a heart pendant that her daughter had worn to every important occasion since high school graduation. The weight of the jewelry against her chest provided comfort and strength as she prepared to face the man who had destroyed her family's world on that September night so long ago. "Are you ready for this?" Detective Matthews asked Margaret as they paused outside the courtroom doors, the murmur of assembled spectators audible through the heavy wood. Margaret's smile carried 8 years of accumulated pain, but also something that had been missing for far too long: hope. "I've been ready for 8 years, Detective. Let's finish this." Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Harrison had spent months preparing for what she knew would be the most important trial of her career. The evidence against Thornton was overwhelming. DNA, witness testimony, his own confession, but she understood that convicting him represented more than legal victory. This trial would determine whether Ashley Reed's memory received the justice it deserved, or whether her killer might somehow escape the consequences of his actions. Thornton sat at the defense table, looking nothing like the confident predator who had stalked Clearwater's neighborhoods 8 years earlier. Prison had aged him dramatically. His hair had gone completely gray, his face bore deep lines of stress and fear, and his once powerful hands shook constantly from what appeared to be medication side effects. His court-appointed attorney had advised him to plead guilty in exchange for life without parole. But Thornton's narcissistic personality refused to accept responsibility for his actions. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Harrison began her opening statement, her voice carrying throughout the packed courtroom. 8 years ago, Ashley Reed left work excited about helping a family find their dream home. She called her mother to share her joy, planning to be home in 10 minutes. She never made it. The man sitting before you made sure of that. The prosecution's case unfolded with methodical precision, each piece of evidence building an unshakable foundation of Thornton's guilt. Maria Santos testified with quiet courage about the night Thornton had returned home, covered in dirt and consumed with rage. DNA experts explained how microscopic evidence had finally yielded its secrets to advancing technology. Fellow inmates described Thornton's jailhouse boasts about crimes he'd committed against women who deserved what they got. Perhaps the most powerful testimony came from Margaret Reed herself, who took the witness stand wearing the same composure that had sustained her through 8 years of uncertainty. She spoke about Ashley's dreams, her kindness, her dedication to helping others find happiness through home ownership. She described the porch light that had burned every night, the bedroom that remained untouched, the birthday cards she still bought each year for a daughter who would never age beyond 38. Ashley was more than a victim, Margaret testified, her eyes never wavering from the jury. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a valued member of our community. Her life had meaning and purpose and love. The defendant took all of that away, not just from Ashley but from everyone who cared about her. Thornton's defense attorney attempted to portray his client as mentally ill, driven to violence by childhood trauma and substance abuse issues. But the calculated nature of Ashley's stalking and murder, combined with Thornton's years of successful deception, undermined any claim of diminished responsibility. His confession had been too detailed, his disposal of evidence too thorough, his lies too sophisticated for mental illness to serve as meaningful mitigation. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. As the forewoman read the verdict, Thornton's composure finally cracked completely. He sobbed uncontrollably as the judge scheduled sentencing for the following month, his tears flowing not from remorse, but from self-pity at being held accountable for his actions. Judge Sarah Coleman imposed the maximum sentence allowed under Florida law, life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 50 years for the associated charges. "Miss Thornton," she declared from the bench, "you have forfeited any right to freedom, any claim to mercy, any hope of redemption. You will spend the rest of your natural life paying for what you took from Ashley Reed and her family." Margaret Reed felt something she hadn't experienced in 8 years as she walked out of the courthouse into blazing afternoon sunshine. Peace, not happiness. Ashley's absence would ensure that happiness remained incomplete forever. But peace. The questions that had tormented her family for nearly a decade had finally been answered. Justice had been served. Ashley could rest. That evening, for the first time in 8 years, Margaret Reed climbed her front porch steps and turned off the yellow light that had burned faithfully through seasons of hope and despair. The darkness that followed felt different now, not empty, but complete, like a story that had finally found its ending. Clearwater's healing began slowly, like morning light creeping across water after the longest night imaginable. The community that had been fractured by Ashley Reed's disappearance and the shocking revelation of David Michael Thornton's betrayal gradually found ways to rebuild trust while honoring the memory of a woman whose life had touched so many hearts. The Reed family established the Ashley Reed Foundation, dedicated to supporting families of missing persons and advocating for improved investigative resources. Margaret's porch light, no longer needed as a beacon of hope, was donated to the foundation's offices, where it continues burning as a symbol of persistence in the face of overwhelming darkness. Detective Matthews, nearing retirement, often reflects on how technology finally provided answers that traditional investigation couldn't deliver. Ashley's case taught us that justice doesn't always come quickly, he tells new recruits. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it takes advances in science we can't even imagine yet. But if we preserve evidence and never stop caring, the truth eventually finds a way to surface. Clearwater's residents learned profound lessons about the facades that evil can wear and the importance of trusting instincts when something feels wrong. They also discovered the incredible power of community support and the way shared grief can transform into collective strength. Most importantly, Ashley's story demonstrates that some lights never truly go out. Her memory lives on in the families she helped find homes, the foundation that bears her name, and the countless people who learned that love persists, even when hope seems lost. Justice may arrive late, but it arrives. Truth may hide for years, but it cannot remain buried forever. In a small Florida town where Spanish moss whispers secrets in the wind, Ashley Reed's light continues to shine, illuminating the path toward justice for others who still wait in darkness, still hope for answers, still believe that every story deserves an ending, and that every life deserves to be remembered.